Now throw your hands up in the air. Am I everything you need? You better rock your body now, everybody. Yeah.
Whether you're cis, trans, intersex, non-binary, or realized you're agender and off the spectrum altogether, the more you look around, the more you'll see. And if you really look, holy will you see some bodies. Bodies, bodies, bodies. In Stephen King's horror novel Carrie, blood surges from the character at the onset of puberty. It's a signal of their truest power coming forward, but for everyone around her, it's a sign that she isn't just special. She is other. She must be contained, controlled, and if those aren't possible, destroyed. Just a horror story, right? But for Xinyan, it will soon be a reality. He goes to school like most days, even though he would rather stay home playing video games. While he suffers through classes, he thinks about sleeping, and girls, and sleeping with girls. He is just an awkward teenager, and then he feels a blinding pain in his stomach. When he can, he runs to the restroom. He unzips. He lets out that instantly relieving splash of urine, and then sees his horror story. He has soaked the urinal in red blood. Upon taking him to the hospital, Xinyan's parents discover what no one noticed at birth. Their son was born with a mixed set of reproductive organs. Now, at the onset of puberty, he has had his first period. There is a word for Xinyan: intersex. Intersex people are those born with a variation of their reproductive organs that do not fit binary definitions of male and female. Time will tell if Xinyan is intersex as well as trans, cisgender, non-binary, so long as he is given that time. Except his parents rob him of that time. They take from him what is most precious. They lie to him. They do not tell him why he is being put under for surgery. They do not tell him that the doctor claims it will be easier for him if his parents turn him into a girl. Xinyan must become Xilan. Though key elements of the movie Born to be Human are not accurate to the reality of being intersex, the film captures the brutality of having your body, your gender, and your identity chosen for you by someone else. Whereas many people born with intersex traits are forced through surgery as babies, Xinyan/Xilan faces the struggle as a teenager. By forcing them to face self-discovery and surgery as a teenager, the film opens a window of empathy for people being forcibly converted into the wrong gender at any age. In that way, the film provides dark reversal of many trans people. As babies, intersex people are often forced to endure the very surgery that trans people are forcibly denied as adults. It's there that the overlapping struggle embraces all people with diverse bodies on diverse journeys. Just as the direct application of care has irreversible effects, the direct denial of medical care inflicts irreversible damage. Regardless of our age, the people around us declare that they know our bodies better than we do. When our consent most matters, those people ensure our consent will never matter again. Maybe it never did. And yet it's in this encircled struggle for gender-diverse bodies that we find opportunities for empathy, empowerment, and connection. But of course, you don't need to take my word for it. Join me for a mind-blowing discussion with Oscar-nominated director Julie Cohen on her new documentary, Everybody, about the experience of being intersex, why empowering intersex people will empower everyone else, and how to build alliances between all gender-diverse communities.
Well, I felt what you've said in other interviews you hope people would feel. I felt hope. I felt seen. I felt like there's a vision for the future where we can maybe all come together, and this helped me feel that. I was just bawling by the end. If you're ready, I got a few questions for you. Now that the documentary's been out in theaters and it's at the top of some streaming lists, what impact have you seen from the documentary?
Well, I think there's a bunch of different ways to answer that question. One dividing line would be impact of the intersex community,
Yes.
and then also impact on people who are really learning about this issue for the first time. I think there's also a third category of people that had some awareness, and are seeing and watching the film, but I kind of focus on those first two categories. I certainly have heard from quite a number of intersex people whose response to the film has been really overwhelmingly positive, which is great. That doesn't happen with all
Yeah.
projects, even ones done with good intention. But I think a lot of that may stem from something that River says near the beginning of the film, talking about intersex representation, responding to a question that I asked, kind of like, how have you felt about depictions of intersex people, intersex representation? And River kind of backed me up and said, wait a second, the thing that stands out most for me, River, is the zero-ness of it, how minimal, how missing this representation has been. So obviously people responded to first the existence of the film. I would say intersex people were responding just to the very fact of the film, never mind what's actually in the film, in a really positive way. That kind of started first when the announcement about the film's existence and the trailer came out. Just have really, I think, appreciated the film itself, and really in particular the leads in the film, River and Saifa and Alicia, just like getting to know these people who are really interesting and cool people to get to know. Obviously, I selected them with that in mind. Having people on screen that an audience really feels like they can connect to, no matter what the viewer's own personal background, is really helpful. So, but I think that had an impact that I hadn't thought through so clearly about what a nice kind of, I think, mirror that feels like for intersex people to see depiction of, like, no, to put aside past associations of, outsiderness all the way up to and including the freak representation, and like, here's a whole different picture that's actually kind of fun and cool and beautiful to look at. So that's been one strand. And the other main reaction that I've gotten from viewers and audiences has just been, wow, I had no idea. And I might have expected that from, I did expect it to a certain extent, because, when you're making a film, you're talking to your friends and your own community about what the film's about. And I was interested to see, I don't, I think partly it's just from certain journalistic things and things that I've read over time. I actually was aware of intersex people and knew essentially, the basics of what the term meant before I started into this project. But what I kind of learned from talking about it with just like, catching up with people about, hey, what are you working on, was what a kind of baseline of zero we were starting with. People's awareness of the issue and of just even the existence of intersex people was quite minimal, even sophisticated, educated, progressive people. So that audience, I think I was maybe still expecting that the LGBT audience was going to come in more educated, and what the reaction has been is, no, I found while there was much greater interest and enthusiasm for the film among gay and trans people, for the most part, when we did a bunch of, early LGBT screenings, the reaction was pretty much the same, of like, oh, I had no idea. Like, I, because of the existence of the letter I in the fairly common LGBTQIA, I guess I sort of assumed that people would know what it meant. But the more common reaction has been like, oh, I wondered about that I. Like, what's that? What's that about? So, I think it's been, I certainly, in the making of the film, a lot of what I learned felt quite revelatory to me, and I've been really pleased to see that audiences have had a similar reaction of it feeling revelatory, kind of almost no matter what their level of education was going in, because, like, when you really get to know another human being, it positive way. I think it always feels like a revelation.
Yes.
A movie, of course, a movie is not giving you the full picture. You know, you're not getting to know a full person, but like if I'm doing my job correctly, you are feeling like you get sort of a sense, I think, of people's, not only what they've been through, but something kind of an essence of them. And I think getting that exposure to the essence of Alicia and River and Saifa has felt really, really, I think, like a fun exploration for people that have seen the movie.
Yeah, yeah. You chose three great subjects. They gave you a lot of great. That's like the beauty when you find a good subject. It's just like I don't really have to do anything except hit record and let you talk.
Right, right. Which, although actually, I will say, Steph, that is maybe a little bit. I think that's very true what you just said. It's also harder than one would think, like because you have there's such a temptation to be the one who's talking all the time, or to be the one that's sort of imposing one's own idea of what the story is throughout the process, rather than just, no, I'm just going to let people talk and see what I learn, and then as an avenue seems fruitful, try to get them to tell me a little bit more. And that's and because we were following kind of their various activities over about 15 months or so, like I would just check in and say, hey, like what do you have coming up recently? In fact, one of my favorite scenes in the film is the scene where Saifa goes to see himself as part of an art exhibit in Berlin, where that features very artful, nude, full frontal nude photos of himself. And that came about because I was actually planning a trip to go visit Saifa and do a little bit of filming where he lives in Manchester, England. And he was like, oh, you know, since you're coming to Europe, like, would you, there's this exhibit that I'm in that's in Berlin. Would you like to go to that? And that just sounded amazing. Because of my film budget, I actually couldn't go to both England and couldn't have crews in both England and Berlin. So we chose Berlin, which was his recommendation of something I wouldn't have known about, but just one of the things that happened to come up during the period we were filming.
I understand. You got to be adaptable, and it's a powerful inclusion, especially because of his early mention of his vulnerability around his body and sharing it with someone else in such a vulnerable state.
Right.
To go that direction toward the end of the documentary is just like you can feel the growth, and like you said, the personal connection to the people involved changes your perception of the topic being explored. It's no longer just a Wikipedia article that you may have glanced at once.
Right.
In another project, I'll be interviewing Naomi Alderman. Her book, The Power, was turned into an Amazon series about women who all of a sudden, women versus men, women suddenly have the power to generate and control electricity, and it changes the gender paradigm. But she was very careful to include an intersex character in the book. And then after talking to the queer community, she made sure to include trans people as well. She realized biology really is that complex. Having said that, to my knowledge, the intersex character in the show was played by a cisgender person. And I just wonder, what are we, as representation increases, we get better casting, but I wonder if you have insight from inside what to do to empower better casting decisions for actual intersex people representing intersex characters.
Yeah, well, I think there's kind of a few steps in the cycle that need to come out, because obviously for casting directors to start including intersex actors, you need to have some out intersex actors, like, or you can have River Gallo playing every single role of an intersex person, which actually might work right now, but hopefully in a few years there would be more roles that would make that not always possible. And of course, not all roles are going to be right for River, because River at this point is, you know, kind of is a trans femme, is going to be the roles that would be appropriate and would be right, would be right for River. So I think, you know, there's sort of like this bigger societal issue of creating an environment where it feels safe and okay to be out as an intersex person. Which you need to step back, just have some education and some basics, so that like the world as a whole, or I'll stick to America for now, because I would actually say awareness of people of intersex as an identity is a little greater in Europe from what I saw. Yeah. And I can't really speak for the rest of the world, because I haven't been traveling around asking people that question, because I happen to spend some time in Berlin for the story and get to know a few, intersex people in a few different countries, I became aware that things are a little bit different in Europe, but it would be certainly great in the US. It's hard to have an environment where people come out as intersex when everyone's like, huh, what's that? Is it trans? Which is like the
Yes.
number one question.
Yes, and not just that, but early in the documentary, what all three say is it's just so common among intersex, trans, anyone who's gender nonconforming. Most of the time, what you learn about your body happens through self-education and interaction with the community once you're an adult. No one tells you anything when you're a kid.
Yeah. And I think that is to the extent that there's been some improvement in the past, I'll say 10 to 20 years for
Yes.
people who are intersex,
Yes.
for people who are trans. It's because of the internet. It's because
Yes.
there's a place to go to get
Yes.
educated, which didn't, the societal problems are still there, but at least if someone's like, wait a second, I think there's like that moment in your life where you're like, I have a situation and I kind of doubt I'm the only person in this
Yes.
boat. And
Yes.
like that, like there's a lot of problems with the internet, but there's also some really good, important,
Yes.
wonderful
Yes.
things about it, and the ability to, to educate oneself on, a community that you're part of, or a medical condition, or that and find others that have it and can kind of share their experience without the kind of inherently difficult top-down way that happens if you're going to an expert who isn't of your community, who's going to kind of tell you
Yes.
what they think you are. Like, I think the internet has been incredibly helpful to the intersex community, in similar ways to the trans community, who found ways to connect to one another.
Yes.
Online.
Yes. Especially as is said toward the end, what we do to empower the other empowers ourselves. We're facing a lot of the opposite ends of the same obstacles. Some of us, we're being forced in one direction through the direct application of medical practices. Some of us are being forced in a direction through the direct denial of medical practices.
Right. And it's the view, I mean, I think there's differences depending on individuals, as there always
Yes.
are, but in terms of the three
Yes.
people that we featured in our film, they certainly feel that commonality and think that
Yes.
it's important for trans and intersex people to be advocating for one another. That
Yes.
isn't entirely true across either community, but it is true
Yes.
for the people that
Oh,
were in the
I'm aware there is some division in different parts of the communities I've encountered.
Yeah.
If I could ask you a different kind of question, as a filmmaker and a documentarian, what do you see as the core elements that hook you into turning a subject into a documentary?
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think there are things that would make very good documentaries, but aren't documentaries that I would want to make. I mean,
Yes.
there's kind of very possible for very, there are some beautiful documentaries that are extremely painful to watch.
Yes.
That's
Sure.
not the kind of film I like to make. I'm 59 at this point in my life. I gravitate towards things that have a little bit more of a core of love and positivity to
Yes.
them. So I
Yes.
always think of that as an element, although I don't think it's a necessary element to make a great film. There have been great films that are really painful. So I do think that element, I do think having people on camera who are people that one would want to connect with in real life is a huge help. People who have, like they get some of the core storytelling things, like people who've
Yes.
overcome obstacles, people who are on a journey, like all the things that kind of make something a story. And, obviously in the case of documentaries, you need to include people who are willing and also, I would say, ready to share their stories on
Yes.
camera. And those are two very separate things. There were people that I spoke with for this project who were willing to be part of it, but I wasn't sure that they were ready for all that might entail. I mean, you
Yeah.
might notice that all three of the intersex people who are, featured in the film have basically come to understanding relationships with their parents, and and even though all three went through some difficulties in parental relationships, that there was kind of like a core of love at the start of all of it.
Yes. Yeah.
That's one area in which the three people in the film don't necessarily represent the full intersex community. There are a lot of people who still have totally unaccepting parents, but I guess I was afraid, I didn't want to create a situation where the existence of the film was going to create a real additional problem in
Sure.
family relationships of the on camera of those that were on camera with their families, and I
didn't
think
think
that
of that.
that
That's
would be a
right. Yes.
possibility with a number of people.
Mm.
Also, I prefer like the, people that are adults. I think there's good ways to make docs with you know teenagers or someone in their early 20s, but like on this subject, because of the possibility of like how things would unfold as they become like very public in their intersex identity, like
Yes.
I just didn't want the existence of my film to be causing big problems for the people that were in the film, even if they wanted to be in it. Like I've been making docs for quite a long time, so I know how things kind of unfold in unanticipated ways.
Wow.
Most of those things are quite good, but there also can be challenges. And with this story in particular, I was trying to steer away from those from causing problems.
That makes sense. Well, and you kind of answered the next question I had for you, which was what topics interest you but might need to be explored by other filmmakers. But you kind of touched on that.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot more to be said about, in terms of films, even just on the subject of intersex people.
Yeah.
Um, there will be, because of the lack of kind of foundational knowledge, it seemed like it was going to be important to give a fair amount of intersex, what I called intersex 101
Yeah.
information in the film, and actually to put it near the top in a way that a documentary filmmaker sometimes doesn't really like to do. Like sometimes you would like to be a little bit more like, oh, it's going to unfold.
Yes.
But I'm like, I don't really want somebody to go through the first 20 minutes of the film like confused about like, what is intersex again? Like I'm like, no, I think we need to
Yeah.
actually have the people in the film explain the basics right out there in front. Then we're going to answer some questions as you go along, but I didn't want to just delve into someone's story and have it unfold gradually. I thought, like, I didn't really want people in a theater to be turning to the person next to them and say, but what does intersex mean? Is it trans? Like,
Yes. Well, yes. And I think that does fundamentally shift the experience of the documentary from what is intersex to what is it like to be. It's a totally different conversation.
right.
Um, may I ask you, in what ways have you discovered your own differences as worthiness? It's okay if you need to think, and I can cut anything out.
Yeah, no. I kind of think in some ways to me that question is almost like, what is it to be a mature person? When
Oh,
you
sure.
when you start out as a kid, you think you think of worthiness as like trying to compare yourself to other people and be more like the ones that you see are getting patted on the head. And the whole process of growing up is understanding that that's actually not how it works at all, and it's what distinguishes you from other people and what your differences might be that are actually the most interesting and worthy things about you. Like,
Hmm.
so, certainly this film did, the process of making it and spending time and Sci-Fi and River and Alicia, like, uh, made me think about those questions in ways I might not have before.
Hmm. I see. So, if I understand what you're saying, there may have been situations or people who oppressed you as though your differences were limitations, but that's not your self concept.
Right, like to know, seeing how what's different about you makes you you
Yeah.
is the thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I would also add, like, in terms of identity issues, and there is a relationship here, I think, between sort of like fundamental ideas of feminism, like the whole, understanding that what is important about oneself is not what you look like
Yes.
is a lesson that I think it takes us a lifetime to
Yes.
to achieve. I think that's true to a certain extent for all people, but it's particularly true for people who have, who are born different in a certain way that they might think they need to hide throughout life. And it's true for all women who are like always dealing with being judged
Yes.
on their looks and realizing that's not the main thing. And I think it has some that fundamental concept may have something to do with the unfortunate and like kind of makes me want to cry when I think about it, like divisions that have come out between trans women and cis women.
Yes.
Like that somehow somehow I mean, I actually think it's a relatively small percentage of cis women that are sort of getting into this whole thing of wanting to distinguish themselves for trans women. But I think like having spent your whole life like sort of schooled in like the primacy of how looks are so important plays a role in that, and you're trying to sort of make distinction between like types of women and put yourself on a certain side of that divide.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of intersectionality, and some of it, I don't know where it's going. I hope it's in the right direction, but we'll deal with it when we get there.
Yeah, I mean, in the current environment in this country anyway, because everyone is feeling so
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
bristly, I don't really see a whole lot of things going in a great direction, frankly. And
Yeah.
I think it's actually important for people to try to keep their eye on the notion of supporting one another, and just because someone else's struggle isn't the exact same thing you've been through doesn't
Yeah.
mean that it shouldn't be your struggle also. That's something I would credit all three of the people in the film for understanding
Yeah.
in a very big way, trying to make the connections rather than just like when the forces of oppression are kind of like looming in, bearing down on all of us, rather than thinking like, oh, the best thing for me to do in this difficult time is just protect my little self and my
Yes.
own little people in our own little tiny
Yeah.
pod. Like, no, the way to a better world is if we all remember that looking out for each other is is the best way for us as individuals, as
Yeah.
well as it's like being a good person, but it's also self-interest. Like, no, if I look out for my siblings, then my siblings might look out for me, and like it's the
Yeah.
better thing to do even if they don't.
Yes. Yes. Well said. You actually touched on this a little bit at the opening, but I wonder, what do your collaborators contribute to your storytelling that you wouldn't be able to achieve on your own?
You mean in terms of other people that are working on the film?
Yes, like you have sometimes had a co-director, you have producers, other people in the editing room. What do
Yeah,
they
I mean,
bring with their-
I think everyone that has major involvement in kind of the editorial side, like thinking what the story is going to be, is important. In this case, I felt like it was needed and important to bring on an out intersex person who also has has written a book and has a real understanding of these things as a consulting producer. Shana Knizhnik, her name is, who could help kind of guide things, but also look at cuts of the film and have thoughts on like things that were not gonna that felt potentially like a problem. In the end, we actually saw much more eye to eye than I might have expected
Really
going into this, or that I've maybe sometimes experienced on some past projects. So that was great. But our editor on the film, Kelly Kendrick, also like, that's always a really good collaborative relationship with the editor, because they're coming in later in the process, so like lots of stuff is filmed and they're seeing scenes without without kind of like all the baggage of knowing what went into like all the decisions about, are we going to film this, or are we going to film that, or like how are we going to do it, like
Yes.
he's just looking at all the footage, and like he doesn't know that much about the story when he first sees the footage, and he's looking at it being like, oh, like this is the thing that really stuck out to me as interesting, and then, you know, between us we can work out what each scene is going to be.
You've had such a big career. I wonder, is there anything that any advice you'd give to yourself at the beginning of your career versus where you are now?
Well, my career has sort of evolved in different ways over time, and there was I worked in more traditional broadcast journalism for a long time, radio and TV, and those I actually feel like I developed lots of really, really important skills in that period, and storytelling, etc. And the big sort of downside of that period of a career was that I wasn't in a position to pursue like telling the kind of stories that I wanted to tell. It was more like getting assigned things, or also pitching things that I thought would be the kind of things that my bosses, you know, wanted to do because their audiences wanted to see. So that was all fine. I kind of learned how to tell stories, but I wasn't necessarily telling stories that I wanted to tell, or even telling them in the way that I wanted to tell them. You know, when you work in a corporate job, as I did for a long time, and as I actually basically really enjoyed and learned a lot among other things, but like you're telling a story, like I'm not inventing these shows. There's like a template. You come in, if you come in to, you know, work as a producer on Dateline, you're trying to tell stories the way that they tell stories, which had a lot of plus to it. Like they were very good at like an arc to the story, but then, you know, leaves less room for kind of your individuality and kind of wanting to tell a story in the way that I want to tell it. Also, like our whole society kind of has what's called like a negativity bias. Like we're drawn to like conflict and
yes,
you know, and
outrage.
like as a result, like no disrespect to the people who run the broadcast networks and even the streamers, but like as a result, the shows that tend to be most popular are shows that focus on conflict and division and murder and crime and all that stuff that's happening on like those are important stories. I'm not opposed to telling them, but after a certain number of decades in that mode, I really, as a personal matter, really wanted to focus on stories that were more positive. You know, one thing that I really love about the kind of the story of intersex activism over the past couple decades is that although there's a real traumatic side to this story, I actually think it's a story that's going in the right direction. Things are, as the film even showed, when the you know, on camera people have a conversation with a mom who just more recently had an intersex baby, things often are getting better, and I think are on the road with a little more education to getting much better. I think things for a baby born intersex 10 or 15 years from now will be substantially better than they were for River, Saifa, and Alicia.
Wow.
You know, medical schools are starting to think about, you know, and I think actually, I mean, I would say the out trans and activist trans community gets a huge amount of the credit for that, just by opening up conversations that, as you know, as River said, that have made it possible for intersex people to say like, oh, it's us, you know, we have a story too. And the whole notion that when you have something that is a significant difference, like that's not necessarily the end of the world. And instead of your parents thinking like, oh, this is this nightmare that I have to be totally ashamed of, like, no, maybe it's okay. Like maybe it's fine. I loved the part in the film where Saifa is saying to that mom, like, no, it's beautiful to, like, I think people should be happy when they have intersex babies, like that like it's like I'm beautiful, like why not just think this is like you know, the word that that the three people in the film prefer to use is like a variation. And of course And of course, as Sypha points out, it's not just intersex people that have sex variations. Like, it's all, if you've seen some bodies, like they're all kind of
Yeah.
different.
Yes, which is stands out to me too. Once you start looking at the variations in what we call cisgender, transgender, intersex, non-binary, third gender in different cultures, it transformed my perception to go, oh, this is variance. But in some sense, these categories are practical without being objectively true.
Right.
They're things that we use for functional purposes, but we can also see how in society those distinctions can become problematic when we start to see them as literal distinctions between different kinds of people.
Right.
I have some last questions for you that are a little more fun, but you may need a second to think about them strangely.
Okay.
Julie, what is your favorite word?
My
I
favorite
told you.
word. Okay, this is, I mean, I have lots of words that I love, so it's hard to, but I'll say one that comes up that I don't know, I like alliance. I like the idea of alliance because it's like, I mean, people talk a lot about allies, but that's like an individual thing, whereas an alliance can be like a big group and it sounds really tough and powerful. It's like almost like a military alliance, but there's a way also to have an alliance that isn't like violence oriented.
Yeah.
And also like a friendship can also be an alliance or a romantic partnership. If it's a good one, it should be an alliance.
What is your least favorite word?
Oh. My least favorite word. I don't know. No. How about that? It sort of depends. No. I'm gonna say that's just two ways. No is my favorite word if I'm saying it, and my least favorite word if someone else is saying it to me. How about that?
Sure. What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, okay. So I've recently moved to the suburbs. I live in New Jersey now. I really like all suburban sounds, but I really like the sound of like lawnmowers going on like a Saturday, like not directly in your lawn, but the lawns around you. It just like, I don't know. I like the sound of lawnmowers.
How interesting. Do you also enjoy the smell of freshly cut grass?
I love the smell of
I love the smell of freshly cut grass. I can't explain it. It smells so good.
I mean, you have to. The context for that last answer is that I lived in New York City for like the past 25 years. So moving to where there are lawnmowers has positive associations.
This is also making sense. What sound or noise do you hate?
Yeah, I don't like the sound of like fabric against a wall, not like a sliding wall, but just like even the thought of it, like it makes me cringe. I also I'm one of those, there's a name for the condition where like other people sound like the sound of someone else chewing gum, I hate.
Yeah. What profession other than your own would you like to have attempted?
Oh, DJ.
Really? That is an out there answer. Tell me.
I was not like a nitclub DJ, but like a radio DJ. I did DJing in my college radio station and I loved it. It didn't seem like a very viable career path. Like how many DJs really are there? So it never really occurred to me to pursue that. But I love music. I love arranging music in order. I like talking about the music. So yes, I would like to be a DJ.
That connection to music showed through in the documentary, in the music collections. And I understand there were licensing agreements and a budget that restricted some of your decisions. I also thought it was hilarious that one of the only negative reviews of your documentary said that the music selections were what disappointed them. And I said the music selections were one of the best parts.
Yes, I will say the music has been like, I love the music, and yes, I chose most of those songs. The editor Kelly Kendrick picked a couple of them, and our music supervisors had to help us get versions we could afford, or in some cases had to switch stuff out. But I love the music. Not everybody liked having pop music in a documentary. I don't really know why it bothered people, but most people have loved it, but a few people have hated it.
The gender flipped voices was subversive. It was powerful.
Yes. Well, you know what? I found that the people in general, sometimes if people didn't notice that, which a lot of people didn't, those have been the people that have complained about the song. It's like, why are you using cover songs? Why don't you use the originals? They're so much better. Which,
totally
first of all, I don't think that's true. I love covers, and also I was trying to say something about gender. Yeah.
I got one last question for you, Julie. What do you hope you're remembered for?
Oh. Well, in the context of, I mean, the main, like, I hope I remember for being nice to people. Like, that would be one thing. In the context of this, like, I would hope to be remembered as someone who played a role in the change of society that's going to happen, where everyone's going to be like, oh yeah, intersex, like, everybody knows who intersex people are. And, like, I hope that I'm remembered as having played a role in kind of a greater understanding by non-intersex people of intersex people.
Based on the reaction and the rest of the documentaries you've made, that's kind of what you will be remembered for. Somebody who brought audiences into conversations that otherwise might have been difficult to enter and to have, and a new way to have those conversations, not just in everybody, but in the breadth of your work throughout your career. I see the time, you got to go. I appreciate you taking this time to talk to me, Julie.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Very nice to meet you.
Bye-bye.